As most of you know, my name is Bill Tawika. I am currently the Vice President of Napa County Landmarks. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and its beginnings were way back in 1994. It was founded by a fellow named John Whitridge, and ironically, John Whitridge was the director of the redevelopment agency in Napa, and he decided that in his role as redevelopment agency, he was taking down lots of good buildings, and it just didn't set right with him. So he and a group of citizens who were concerned about Napa's history in 1974 started Napa County Landmarks. And basically the big impetus at that time was the approval and the building of the city and county library, which was on this mansion that you see here. The Migliavacca mansion was going to be torn down for a new library that was going to be built in the brutalism style. That's a whole nother story. The brutalism style, we can probably have a Zoom on styles at some point, but brutalism style was concrete buildings that were very popular in the 70s and in late 60s and early 80s. And so Napa County Landmarks raised some funds, and they actually had this building moved about 4 blocks to the west where it stands today, and it's now used as an office building. But this was, Napa citizens were just tired of seeing all of their buildings being demolished in the urban renewal. This happened throughout the country. I mean, many cities, you go to San Francisco, Boston, Washington area, Sacramento, even Vallejo, smaller towns. There was money from the government to take down blight. So a lot of good old buildings came down because of urban renewal in the 60s and 70s. So anyway, Napa County Landmarks was able to have this building facilitated, was moved by a private owner with donations from the community. So back then, buildings were much cheaper. So Napa County Landmarks helped save a whole bunch of buildings. They moved them. There's a couple examples there. I've got a whole bunch of examples of pictures from the 70s. I didn't move to Napa until 1989, so I wasn't part of all this, so I don't know much about this. But they were almost giving these buildings away back in the 70s because Napa hadn't yet been discovered by the tourism. The grapes, the winery tourism was all up valley, and nothing really was happening in Napa. So some of these lots and buildings were basically pretty cheap. Here's a couple other examples of buildings that were just sitting vacant, and they were restored with the donations and sweat equity, and there was some funding from federal and state governments back then that is not available today. And so in 1970s, we took on other projects, to grow the membership. We started doing tours, neighborhood tours, which we charged a nominal fee. And then we had a guidebook prepared by a intern. In fact, I have a copy of it here. And back then they sold it for $5. We still have some of these in the office if anyone's interested, because it's pretty interesting. It talks about different architectural styles, not just unique to Napa, but just a lot of styles. And there was a couple other publications that we got some state grants to do, and we distributed them for free, and none of those are in existence anymore. I looked for some, but I couldn't find any. We did a lot of walking tours, as you can see here. With this one, we still do this Fuller Park tour regularly. It's a very popular tour in one of the historic districts in Napa, and it probably gets 50 or 60 people every year that we do it. And unfortunately, we aren't going to be doing tours this year. We also created this little guidebook you see here, a map of downtown Napa, which showed some of the significant buildings. That was done a little later on. And that was part of the effort to save the Opera House, which we'll talk about later. Napa also, with its volunteers, did a historic resource inventory. Many cities have historic resource inventories to catalog all of the significant buildings. And you can see in our office, there's a significant amount of paperwork that goes with that. And after we did the first one in the 70s, the cities of St. Helena, Napa, Calistoga, they kind of took it upon themselves over the years to update them. And so most of the cities aren't just using the 1978 version, but they're also using the newer versions that they've had their own staff and consultants prepare. But we were the impetus to start that back when there was some federal and state funding for these kinds of surveys. So in 1977 is when we first started doing that. One of our significant events for fundraising, and I think if anyone is interested in starting a nonprofit, you really need to think of fundraising, and some signature events are really one way to do that. We do this holiday candlelight tour where we get 600 or 700 people every year to go on this tour, and at, $30 a ticket, we do pretty well with that. These are houses that are decorated in the Christmas spirit. And usually it's in one neighborhood where people can walk between the houses so they don't have to drive between them. And every year we feature a different neighborhood, and they've been doing it since 1989. And I'm proud to say that I've been on all but 2 of them. The first year I had just moved here and didn't get engaged in that. And another year I happened to be in Hawaii, so I missed that particular event. But it's, and for the last 10 years, I've been a docent and volunteered at the event. It's something that nonprofits should really do to raise awareness, is to really get a signature event, and that's really our signature event. But what happened in 1981, a lot of the grants from the federal government and state government was pretty much dried up. So the small staff that we had was let go, but there was a hue and cry from the community that they didn't want this organization to go away. So we actually increased our membership, and we increased our tours, and then we searched for private funding. In fact, you see this Napa Opera House here, which is in downtown Napa. The Robert and Margaret Mondavi were one of the big contributors. If you are familiar with the UC Davis, as Robert and Margaret Mondavi Center there, and they were significant contributors to save this building. Otherwise, a developer had purchased this, and they wanted to tear it down and build a 4-story office building here. And that would have been a shame, because this is really a significant part of Napa's history. I don't have the date when it was built, but I certainly could find that out here. Now, here's one of the things that really galvanized the community. In the early 90s, the courthouse Hall of Records, which was one of the first buildings to be built in Napa for the county, was going to be torn down. And there was a huge hue and cry that they didn't want this building taken down. And the county at that time had said that it was much more cost effective to build a new building than to preserve the old one. So what happened is that we got behind this, and we searched for an architect who could actually give us pointers to see if this building could be saved with the California Historic Building Code, and using those techniques, and an architect that was really preservation oriented. And we also hired an attorney, Susan Brandt Hawley, who was one of the CEQA attorneys. She worked, with Napa County Landmarks on several buildings, one of them being the courthouse here that we talked about, and also the Opera House that we just talked about. She was very instrumental in convincing the county that they hadn't done CEQA in the way that they should have. So what happened was that finally the Napa County Landmarks, through legal efforts and through a lot of community support, was able to convince the county that it would be just as cost effective to save this building as to build a new one. And that's exactly what happened. We were able to save this building for about the same cost that it would be if the building had been torn down and new ones built. We had many, and I remember this. I was in Napa at that time in the early 90s. I remember so many letters to the editor and different arguments to and pro and con about whether this building should stay. It was a Herculean effort. What happened originally, the county had hired a firm that said that it wasn't worth saving, but then we convinced them to hire another firm, and that firm said that yes, it could be saved, and that was also peer reviewed. And then there still wasn't a lot of movement, so we got an attorney involved, and that's really when the movement started happening. So the building was restored, and here you see a modern picture. I can show you in this picture that the Hall of Records is this front building here. I don't know if you can see my pointer. But this front building here, the one that's behind where these cars are parked with the center entrance, that is the Hall of Records. And today it houses the jury waiting room on the second floor. It's a beautiful space, and there's some offices and other kinds of utilities down below. This center section is a 1978 addition that was built sensitively to the old courthouse, which is further along here. The demolition would have taken the Hall of Records down and the 1978 building, and they were going to build like a 6-story building here instead of this beautiful building that remains today. This is the picture of the opening back in the 90s when they had the ribbon cutting. And here is a picture that shows the front of this building, and it's just a gorgeous building and a wonderful place to wait while you're waiting on jury duty. As much as that is not a pleasurable experience, at least you're sitting in a beautiful room with many amenities, which is that second story. And the dedication, of course, was to Mr. Whitridge, who has since passed away shortly after this was dedicated. But he was a force in Napa. And he was sadly missed, of course, because he really, took a lot of things on. And if it wasn't for John Whitridge, this nonprofit wouldn't be as successful as it is. There's the other side, the original courthouse building. If you see in this picture here on the right, that's the building way on the far. It's kind of a courthouse complex where it's one whole block. This is the 78 edition. This is the Hall of Records and the courthouse. And then there's a big magnolia tree here. And under that magnolia tree, there's an Indian grinding rock that was moved there by the county in 1942 because it was in the path of construction for another county building, and they were going to take it away and destroy it. But there were some citizens that were concerned about this, and so it got moved. And I have a picture of that, but not in this slideshow, but it's over here under this magnolia tree, and it's a huge rock with a lot of the indentations of the grinding rock. Another one of Napa County Landmarks' real parts, things that we're very proud of, is to save the First National Bank building. In 1990, we looked for a home for our office because we were in all kinds of different places, renting here or there. We never really had a good office. So this building, which housed the First National Bank, which had been vacant for several years, was for sale for $350,000. Actually, it went for $325,000, if you can believe that. And we needed another $75,000 to refurbish it. So we raised the funds and took out a small mortgage, and we got some grants at that time to do the retrofit, the earthquake retrofit. And so it was originally going to become the site of, the history center, so that we would be there in that building, but it just became financially infeasible because we couldn't find appropriate tenants, and the cost of maintaining that building was just too much for a small nonprofit. So what we ended up doing with that building, here's the original bank with what it looked like back in the day when it was a bank. If you'd like to see what it looks like now, you can go to the restaurant's website. Whoops, where is that? There's the slide missing or something. Anyway, the restaurant Alegria now occupies that building, and their website would show what this looks like. You have to put Restaurant Alegria Napa because there's also, this owner has a similar name restaurant in Walnut Creek, but the Napa one is in a historic building and is a very popular spot in Napa, and has really good food. So here is, there's a slide missing that was to show the outside of that, and I don't know what happened to that. At any rate, that is now leased to this restaurateur, and it's our main source of income because we get quite a significant amount of monthly rent from that building, and we have retired the mortgage, and it was recently appraised at $3 million. So our $350,000 investment has really paid off, and there's many people who would like to purchase this building, but we are not selling at this point. We feel that this is something that we want to maintain in the beautiful condition that it is. There was some close-ups of the, here we are, it just came up, there it is. That's the building today with the outdoor eating. This picture was just taken earlier this week. because you can see, because of our requirement for outdoor eating, the city of Napa owns most of the part from the tree to the left is owned by the city of Napa and a little plaza, and they graciously have allowed this restaurateur to put tables and umbrellas out there in order to support outdoor dining. It's a lovely spot, so if you're in Napa and want a beautiful atmosphere for a dinner, it's quite a nice historic spot. Now, many of you might remember the earthquake that occurred in August of 2014. That earthquake was centered in the south part of Napa and, really did quite a lot of damage to this beautiful post office. This post office was built in, let's see, we have that here, 1933, and the architect was William Corlett. He's the same architect that designed the Hall of Records, which he had done early in his career, and then he did this one later in his career. Also, the Napa High School on Jefferson Street, if you were to take a look at that, you can probably see that online, but it's a beautiful building as well, and that was also recently restored by the school district, and that's another William Corlett building. But you see, the WPA often hired local architects to do these projects. And so that's why all of the post office kind of have the same theme, the Art Deco theme. However, local architects put their own stamp on this. And this building here has a lot of detail. It's really got four-sided architecture. Even the loading zone in the back has some of these ram's heads that are on the top and the striated columns and some of the beautiful portions of medallions that are over the windows. As I said, he designed several other buildings in Napa, but this is probably his most ornate. There's a close-up of the ram's head. It's amazing where the architects got their inspiration for these kinds of Art Deco features, but they certainly are wonderful compared to what some of the architecture is today. It's more of a streamlined look today. Back then, there was much more ornamentation in the architecture. It's the WPA modern style, they call it. And, these groove pilasters are something that is very common in that era of architecture. Now, the earthquake did a lot of damage to this. 6.0 magnitude, as you can see in the inside pictures here. That's the lobby. It was just, much of it was cracked. The columns were tilted. There was debris all over the place, and most of the lobby window glass was shattered. But, in spite of that, a lot of the significant features were survived, and the original National Register listing in 1985, when they did a 2015 amendment, they still felt that the building had integrity and should not be destroyed. According to the State Historic Preservation Officer, they were in favor of us, of the post office, to put this building back together. However, you can see here, there was significant damage. And the post office had said at that time that it would cost $8 million to refurbish this building. And, we thought that we, and also the State Historic Preservation Officer at that time, thought that that was probably not realistic, that it was really much less than that, that it wouldn't be $8 million to do that. But at any rate, you can see the lobby has some nice features in it. The post office was ready to take it down because for $500,000, they felt that they could demolish this post office. So even though the Daniel Delahaye, the post office preservation officer, wanted initially to save it, apparently the powers to be that were above him said that no, this wasn't something that the post office was interested in keeping. So what happened here is that this local opposition swiftly mounted, and Brian Turner from the National Trust, he decided to get involved. Brian Turner is an attorney in San Francisco for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and he tried to convince the federal government that this was something that was worth saving, and the city of Napa also, we got behind this thing, and there was a campaign to save this, and what happened was in 2015 in August, you remember Harvey Smith, who actually talked on one of the earlier Zooms, came to Napa. And I didn't remember that because I wasn't here at that time. I happened that morning, I was on a flight back east because my mother's health had taken a turn for the worse. And I wasn't at this meeting. So I kind of forgot about the fact that Harvey actually came to Napa to talk to us about some of the work that he had done with saving other post offices. But what he did emphasize when he was there, that the indelible public nature of the tax financings, the public tax finances that built these buildings, and they should be saved for the public, and they just shouldn't be sold out and destroyed. I mean, even if they went into private hands, they need to be saved for the future. So for the next 18 months, the post office agreed to try and find a buyer for this. And they finally did find a buyer after we mounted. As you can see here, there was a huge outcry, a huge campaign. It's called this heart bomb thing, where we had these, everybody wrote hearts and hung them on the fence. And there were, school kids and all kinds of people came down for this rally and put their hearts on the fence with their feelings about what should happen to the post office. So finally, the post office found a buyer, and as part of that, they struck a covenant between the buyer, whoever the owner would be, Napa County Landmarks, and the post office, that any changes, additions, or renovation to this building had to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. And the post office gave Napa County Landmarks $25,000 to enforce that, of which we've already spent a little bit of that because of the issues that have come up in the plans, which I'll get into in a minute. But I mean, it's important to, even though this building gets an addition, gets enlarged or gets changed in some way, it's important to save the significant features consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards. And if it wasn't for this contract, it probably wouldn't have happened. It happened. It's a covenant. And unfortunately, the City of Napa's planning department hasn't really engaged themselves in that. And they've kind of left it to us to be pushing, Napa County Landmarks to be really helping this thing along. Now, the developer who bought this building did actually submit a plan, and this was the first plan. This was reviewed by a preservation architect, Mike Garavaglia, who Napa County hired to review this to see if this project what was consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards and what issues came, what would make it consistent. And obviously this really wasn't consistent, because what you see here mostly is the addition. The old post office should be significant. One of the tenets of the Secretary of the Interior standards is that the original building needs to be the prominent building when additions are made. So this was submitted to the city and to Napa County Landmarks in 2018. And the city was frankly ready to approve it the way it was, but Napa County Landmark says they need to hold off on this. And Mike Garavaglia, did a very an intense analysis of this and presented it to the city at a public hearing. And so it was back to the drawing board. And it was many, many months later that a new plan was submitted. And this is the draft plan that has been submitted. As you can see, the wings on the side have been pulled back some 25 feet, and now there's just like a little patio. All of the stuff on the roof has been taken away. There's still some issues that I certainly have with this, that when this does come to a public hearing, I would, believe that those glass boxes on the top really are not something that I feel adds to the design. But what is interesting about this is that these, the columns with the striations on the old building has kind of been replicated a little bit here, so that at least there's some harmony there. And, given the high cost of, repair and the high cost of real estate in Napa, it's not likely that this building would be repaired in its original form, that there has to be some other more, intense use in order to make a financial, go of this whole thing. So that's what this is going to be, as a hotel and a spa and a restaurant. And over here on the left is a public parking lot today. And the city has decided that this developer can use that as a parking garage, with the first floor being retail. So it just doesn't look like a an ugly parking garage, but as you walk the sidewalk, it appears just to be a tall building, and the cars won't be something that you'll see sticking out of as some of the old style parking garages. The cars will be kind of hidden on the second and third floors. But this is we feel that this is a good beginning, and right now it has not been reviewed by the city, nor has it been reviewed by the Cultural Heritage Commission. I currently am the chair of the Cultural Heritage Commission. So when it comes to our commission, we'll certainly see what our commissioners say about this. But hopefully something will happen soon, and this building gets saved. So this was really, Napa County Landmarks. If it wasn't for a nonprofit, a private nonprofit in a city like Napa, none of this stuff that you've seen tonight, none of these buildings would have been preserved. Everything would have been knocked down. So I think it's very important that even a city the size of Placerville, that there's some kind of a checks and balance that goes beyond just what the planning department, dishes out as far as preservation. It's got to be a active citizens committee. And the way you do that is, you raise funds, you have tours, you produce guidebooks, you apply for any grants that you can. You get a lot of citizens involved, docents to help out with this stuff, and you really can make a difference. Today we have a lot of events. In fact, you can see of several of the things we do today. There's bicycle tours. I've led those bicycle tours several times. We have this, so you can see this here, this vintage trailer hitch up at Bothay Park. Every 3 or 4 years, we have that, and the theme of it is a little different. We were going to do another one this year, but because the last one was done, I think, 4 years ago, but now with all of the shutdown, it's not really happening. And hopefully we'll be able to do that next year. We, again, still lead tours of the neighborhood. There's a church that's a very, beautiful church inside, the Methodist church. It's a lovely building. And the tour went inside that. We take people in buildings as much as we can. A lot of single home events. This building on the right, this is a Victorian that was restored by one of the vintners in town, Lauren Ackerman, and she has allowed us to host events in there as well. And they're well attended by the public. And we also, if you might have heard of Napa Porch Fest, which is all of the bands on the porches, we got that idea from a city in New York that had started that some years ago. I think it was with the Cornell University as Ithaca. They had done that. And so we brought it here, and it's become quite an event. And other cities such as San Rafael and Petaluma have actually replicated that, only on a smaller scale. And it's always the last Sunday in July. And of course, this year we unfortunately didn't have it. And all of these things are not only are they fun for the community, but they're huge fundraisers for Napa County Landmark, because even though Porch Fest is really a free event, we sell T-shirts, and the T-shirts are in huge demand. We sell a lot of them, and different other trinkets that we have for sale at these events. But that's about it today. If there's any questions I can figure out how to get everybody so I can see everybody again. And let's see, that would be here. Maybe there we go. So if there's any questions, I know I went through that kind of quickly because we have a half an hour here, and it's now about 6:34 or something like that. So if any of you folks have questions, I know that we tried to get a lot of other Napa people on here tonight, but it's political season, and there's some Zoom candidates forums that have been going on. Plus the city of Napa is in the process of doing their general plan update. So there's a bunch of interest in what these council members feel about some of the land use decisions in Napa. So as you can imagine, many of our Napa County Landmarks members are quite interested in that. So that just fell on the same night as this Zoom, but none of this is new to the members anyway, so it's probably fine. Anyway, questions?
Bill, that was just excellent. Thank you so much. I'm sure there are going to be some questions. I did want to ask, is that interior of the post office then? Is that, first of all, has it been all cleaned up from the earthquake, and are people even allowed to go in there right now?
Well, it's all cleaned up, and some of us have been in there, of course, because we've got certain reasons to be there. But no, it is not available to the public. It's not like some of the post offices that you've seen with a lot of murals in them. or some of the buildings in San Francisco of the WPA era. This is a terrazzo and a mosaic, and it's really quite beautiful. The plans for that, when it is finished, the developer says that he's going to create like a speakeasy kind of pub in the front, and also use some of the little vaulted rooms that are down below it as part of this speakeasy atmosphere. And because the Secretary of the Interior standards, if you know about how those are administered, any building that has been open to the public portions need to be restored. So a post office, the lobby is really the only part that is subject to the Secretary of Interior standards when it restored. So that really does have to be restored and look like what it did when it was a post office. And if any of you are familiar with the one that Harvey talked about in San Francisco, the Rincon Annex, which is built in the rear, they built an office building. They actually restored the lobby to look just like it did when it was a post office, and that has some beautiful murals. If you're ever in San Francisco, as Harvey said, it's really one building that you can't miss.
And I guess my one other question, though, about the post office, it did seem like the fact that the Postal Service or the post office organization sounds like they had a preservation officer that was instrumental in this covenant, and it sounds like they had an interest. Somehow there was a historic preservation culture within the post office organization or the USPS that facilitated that.
That's mostly true. Of course, like all Caltrans, any of these other big organizations, they have a preservation officer, and that at the time was Daniel Delahaye. And of course, he was instrumental in trying to save this, although his superiors thought differently. But I think really the impetus to really help save this was from attorney Brian Turner, who was a National Trust attorney. National Trust has an office in San Francisco, and that's where his office is. Any of you that have been to CPF conferences might have heard Brian speak, but he really was the person who convinced the post office, he works for the National Trust, that this is a building and other post offices are buildings that deserve to be saved. And so that's how the covenant was prepared. Brian, reviewed the covenant, and the covenant, of course, requires that the Secretary of the Interior standards be honored. But Jennifer, you're right. I mean, Daniel Delahaye, he's a preservation officer. Obviously, to be in that field and have a preservation background, he must have had an affinity for this building. So yes, luckily that's true, and hopefully that's true with organizations like Caltrans and cities, that they have preservation people that really take it to heart and do their job and preserve buildings. Anyway. Well,
I mean, this covenant, this idea that there was going to be basically a preservation easement on this building,
right.
When you had all this other force within the Postal Service that wanted to sell these buildings, like we heard a lot about from Harvey, and get rid of, whatever these maintenance costs and everything else. So, somehow within the Postal Service itself, because otherwise there was such a drive, and then you had an earthquake, so you had all this damage. So I'm just kind of amazed, that this covenant happened, because that obviously was the key thing that has led to the outcome, of having leverage over what the architectural outcome is going to be.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting to think about. I mean, essentially how you would get such an easement. I don't think it would be possible if you didn't have some kind of interest on the owner, the current owner of the building.
Well, that's true. But also I think that this is how I kind of see it, is that the post office kind of saw the light when there was so much resistance to tearing it down in Napa. There was a huge hue and cry from the citizens. If this earthquake hadn't happened, I kind of think that they would have closed this anyway, because they didn't need this big building. There's a more modern, built in the 60s post office in the north part of Napa that has, the huge place where they park the trucks and the large place where they do the mail sorting. So this building was kind of, extra anyway. And I feel that over the years it would have been taken away. But I think the post office really got religion when Napa County Landmarks and the attorney, Brian Turner, from the National Trust really, put the the brakes on them and really, tell them that there's a lot of interest here and we've got to come up with a solution. And Napa County Landmarks really was the driving force in the community to get that. We really rallied the troops. I mean, there were like hordes of people outside this post office during several rallies that we had, as you saw in the picture where people put their stickers, their heart stickers on the fence, which the fence is still there today. Of course, the stuff has been taken off, but I mean, the post office really was. They were willing at some point. They tried, and for 18 months they did try to find a buyer, and it was $2 million is what the post office sold this to developer for. That's what the price of this was, which really is just basically price of land. Land in Napa, because of its desirability these days, is not what it was 40 years ago. Everything is very expensive. Napa has changed a lot. And buildings like this, the land is more desirable than the building.
Well, thank you so much. Other folks, I'm sure, have questions.
Frank.
Bill, I just want to compliment you on the great work you're doing in Napa. I have a friend that lives in Napa, and she toured us around right after the earthquake, and we saw all the damage, and to see so many of these things restored is really, really great. She also took us down to by the river on the river walk, and that area down there is just incredible. You're becoming a major tourist attraction there.
Well, that's right. And to the chagrin of some of the locals, it's very much tourist attraction now, and that's good. I agree with that. And we just hope that they save some things for the locals. Some of the more reasonably priced restaurants and some of the pubs that used to be there. It's got to be a blend of a tourist town, like in Placerville. I mean, you want your tourists, but you also want things for the locals to come and do things. But
right.
but Napa County really, we were quite active after this earthquake. I mean, we really got in gear, and there were many things. We found consultants to help out. A lot of things were preserved because Napa County Landmarks really pushed for it.
I think Kirk Smith actually has some other comments too.
Oh, I don't see Kirk. Do I see Kirk?
Bill, I wanted to
you are.
commend you because it's exceptional work that you and the people of Napa have done. Thrilling. The contrast to Placerville is the sad part, because in the town and the county, we have the worst record of historic preservation in the entire Mother Lode. You look at all these other towns and we're clearly the worst. There's no effort to do the preservation that the people of this town want. So,
well, I understand what you're saying, because Tuesday I happened to be in Grass Valley and I was amazed at what they've done with the outdoor seating and to bring people into town, and some of the preservation of some of the buildings. It had been 10 years since I actually went to Grass Valley. I had been to the California Preservation Foundation conference back in 2010 there, but I really hadn't been in the town since then. And I'm just impressed with what the folks in Grass Valley and Nevada City have done to their cities. And Placerville has equal amount of resources as those towns do, for sure.
well, here's my question. You earlier talked about the volumes you have of an inventory of all the historic buildings in the area.
Right, that's
I want to know how many volumes, because it looked like quite a few.
yes.
And to let you know why I'm asking, Placerville has one for the city that in comparison is more like a pamphlet. And when an issue comes before the Planning Commission, they and the staff will say, well, if it's not on our registry, then it's not historic. When the people who put it together said it was only a start and was never intended to be the complete compilation of what could be the case. So how many volumes do you have in front of us?
Well, one thing to realize about Napa County landmarks is we're just not for the city of Napa. We did the surveys, as you see in these pictures here, these books. We did a survey with volunteers back in 1977, 78 of the whole county. And they were done on the forms, the National Park Service DPR forms, the Department of Public, the DPR forms that are used when one does an evaluation. And those forms were first done by the volunteers and evaluated by professional consultants. There was architects and people who knew what they were doing. And a lot of this was labor, this unpaid labor. And then the cities of Napa, Calistoga, St. Helena, they were pressured by their citizens, of course, to update these. So the problem in Placerville is that doesn't seem to be anybody on the staff of the city that is interested in putting, something on the city council agenda to put some funds aside to have a professional preservationist do these kinds of surveys. We have a preservationist on our board who actually does this stuff for a living. So it's available. It just takes, the will of the city. It has to start there. Or alternatively, like with Napa County Landmarks, we kind of started it with volunteer labor and our own consultants that we hired through our grants and some funds to create these. Placerville needs, they really do need a comprehensive survey of all of the buildings. The whole county actually should have it, but the city of Placerville especially.
So let's just take, for example, that first volume on the left. It looks like about 3 inches wide.
Yeah.
How much of the town of Napa is covered in there? If it were to put in one volume, how much space would it take up?
Well, there's probably 300 or 400 houses. Well, more than that. There's probably 500 or 600 houses in Napa that have been evaluated to be, either of some significance, either a contributor or a landmark or whatever. And there's probably 500 or 600 houses, and there's still more neighborhoods to do because, when a neighborhood gets to be, buildings get to be 50 years old, there's many buildings now that are built in the mid-century that are eligible to be in a listing. So Placerville the city, it sounds like, has never taken on a survey from what you're saying. They don't have.
It did once back in, I think it was the 70s.
Yeah.
And a couple local volunteers put the work together. They had a grant of maybe $10,000 or so.
Right.
From one group and some more money from another group. And those I spoke to who put it together said it was just a start.
Right.
They intended to come back and do it later. The problem now is, just to give you an example, on October 6th, the Planning Commission is going to consider the preservation of an historic building or authorize it to be demolished. And the last time this came up, they said, no, it's not historic because it's not listed in that directory.
Well, CEQA says something different. CEQA says that a building is historic if it's eligible to be on the listing. So before they tear that down, somebody has to do a California Environmental Quality Act analysis. Somebody needs to do CEQA on that building, because I think if you did an analysis of that building, you would find that it is historic. So just because a building is listed, and you can ask any of these preservation attorneys, and that's what Susan Brandt Hawley has told us many, many times when cities, she's represented a lot of cities, for example, citizens where the cities have said, no, it's not historic. Well, that's not really the case. If it's eligible to be on the listing, it's historic.
Well, you won't get any argument from us. The problem is the city and the Planning Commission have opposite views that you've just described. And in this town and county, there's been lots of CEQA lawsuits for just these kinds of reasons. But thank you.
Right. Well, and it's a struggle, I understand, but that's a weak argument when they say it's not listed, because that, according to CEQA, that doesn't mean anything. If it's eligible to be listed, it's historic and needs to be protected.
Here's another
Hey,
question.
Bill,
When somebody comes before, well, this is just helpful for the next couple of weeks, but when someone comes before your planning commission, any of your commissions, are they required to testify under oath, or is it just off the cuff?
Well, they just have to state who, where they live and whatever. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. People aren't sworn in when citizens come before or anybody comes before a commission and speaks. I think it's whatever people say.
But how about the specific applicant? Do those persons who get more time because it's their position, do they have to swear under oath?
I've never really thought about that, but what has to happen often when these professional studies are submitted to the city, for example, an applicant may submit a study to the city that says one thing, that the building isn't historic. Well, that's what happened with the Hall of Records in this little, in the story I told here tonight. The county originally said, oh, it's it can't be saved. But then Napa County Landmarks hired, actually we didn't hire, we convinced the county through a CEQA attorney that they need to do another study. And that study found that it was historic, and then the county didn't believe it and they hired somebody else, and that somebody else that they hired said, yes, it is historic. So, any of these documents that are presented to the city that say, oh, it's not worth saving, it really needs to be peer reviewed by another consultant, because it's always, the developer's going to slant it to what they want it to say. I mean, you can hire anybody to do anything. This is something you often see with Caltrans and the traffic studies. You can make a traffic study say anything. It's just very difficult. But that's, having worked in the planning field for 30 years, we always get things peer reviewed if there's any question about this, and an independent peer review, someone who's got a reputation as, say, a preservation architect, that their reputation stands on them being honest and forthright and telling it like it is. So that's the problem, is that they listen. It sounds like City of Placerville accepts one study and doesn't really go any further than that.
Hey, Bill, can you comment a little bit on this idea of what was inventoried or what might be inventoried? Because there's obviously other resources besides buildings. And
right,
I'm just wondering if these volumes and if the inventory work included other kinds of resources.
It does include some cultural resources such as Fuller Park, cultural landscapes, but for the most part, in the 70s, a lot of these surveys were done, as Kirk said, with a grant. The bicentennial in 1976 established a lot of grants for communities to do preservation work. And I was a young person then and really wasn't engaged in it. I was in college at the time. And, 1976, a lot of those funds have run out. But I think that it sounds like from what Kirk said that something happened with a grant in the 70s, and that might have been one of those. And those focused on buildings for the most part, but there are some things in the Napa, survey here. For example, Fuller Park, there's that. And if you look at, for example, in another city, in city of Vallejo, where I worked, in Mare Island has a whole bunch of cultural landscapes that have been recorded in the survey. So it's not just buildings. A comprehensive survey would Native American sites, all of that should be included in a cultural landscape, in a historic resource inventory, whether it's a cultural landscape, whether it's a building, whether it's, Native American artifacts, whatever, bridges, for example, all of those things are worthy of being in a survey, but it just depends upon what the jurisdiction hires and wants to concentrate on. The consultants only usually do what they're hired to do, but a comprehensive survey should include all of that, as it did with Mare Island, for example. That's a great example where everything was surveyed, whether it's a statue or a bunker, whatever. All of that ended up being in the survey.
Jennifer?
Hi, Ruth. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, Bill, thanks so much. Really, really inspiring, and just really great to hear about how Napa has been handling this. And it makes me kind of sad that we're so far behind the 8 ball, and just repeating some of the things that Kirk said about we just don't really seem to have the momentum. We have some individuals who have, but they're lone voices, you know, they're lone wolves in
Right.
front of the, and it's just unfortunate we don't have this momentum. So a couple things I wanted to ask was, now those forms way back when that were
These
filled
forms in the
out,
books, yeah.
the
Yeah.
forms in the books, are those the same forms today?
Yes,
we
well, of
access-
course, the DPR forms, as I think Jennifer's really familiar with, have been updated since the 70s.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
An analysis of a building, you know, a listing, or say a National Register listing would be much more complex and complete than it was even in the 80s. But yes, those forms are all available on the National Park Service website. They're there for anyone to look at and fill out. But you know, in order for
So
Go
a
ahead.
grassroots group of individuals could at least begin on a volunteer basis.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially with some, you know, some help of someone who knows a little bit about architecture. Yes, for sure. That's how it all started.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah,
were
I mean, I'd
lucky
be
enough
very-
to have. Yeah, no, you can do that.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in taking part in something like that, and because we got to start somewhere, and and it's sad too to live in an area where there isn't that momentum and there isn't that appreciation beyond some individuals. I mean, we even have some historical groups. I can't speak to it, but I get the sense that even among these various historical groups, perhaps there's some fractious kind of behavior. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you need to establish someone with a voice like we at Napa County Landmarks, with a voice that can speak in unison before these planning commission and city council people. I think that would make a difference if you were able to, you know, start having some kind of a nonprofit, and you know, you raise awareness by having tours, you create guidebooks like this, you know, this book of architecture here, these kinds of things.
Right, and we have just started, I shouldn't say we because I'm not included, but we do have a new 501c3 that is about historical preservation. And hopefully, I know they're not online tonight, but I think they're going to be watching the recording of this. And so I would hope that would be a good.
Talk to them, you know,
Sure.
to them.
Oh, I texted them during this and asked them to sign on, but they're otherwise committed. The other thing, though, I wanted to mention, so I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I go back to visit every couple of years, and that's obviously where the University of Michigan is.
Yes, that's a town that cares about their resources.
They care about the resources. The other thing about University of Michigan, I'll also say frankly, they have more money than they know what to do with. They have so many alumni that give so much money that they literally will tear down buildings that are 30 years old just to build a bigger and better building. I've seen it happen. And my sister who lives there, she keeps her, you know, eye on things, and she'll tell me. I mean, it's just, they really literally have so much money. But one thing I want to mention is they are very good with preservation of some of these really wonderful, wonderful old buildings. And you know, you showed us the example of that building that's then going to have the hotel attached to the back of it.
The post office, right? Yes.
The post office. And
post office it will have the hotel attached to the back of it.
Right. And I just want to say, I mean, just frankly, you know, I'd give that as far as design and its congruence to the post office, you know, I give it a passing grade.
Yeah, it's a start.
Yeah, it's a start, but I want to tell you, Bill, you got to see how they've incorporated these old buildings into the huge new buildings on the campus at the University of Michigan, because their attention to detail to really emulate that old style. I mean, they're not building something, how can I say, they just know how to incorporate some of the elements.
Well, and that's
really on point. It's really on point.
Yes, and that's important. And, you know, you have to adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards. You can't create something that looks like an old building that would fool the people to thinking, oh, it's an old building. There has to be a difference that shows that so the viewer knows that it's a new building. an old building. And I think there's a lot of controversy about that particular style. You know, the Crocker Museum in Sacramento, for any of you familiar,
Yes.
there's a modern addition on there. And there was a lot of controversy about that, but frankly, it meets the secretary's standards because the old building stands alone as itself. And there's the Presidio in San Francisco where the Disney Museum, and they built on the back of those. There's a whole bunch of, that's one of the most controversial issues when it comes to architects, planners, as to how to administer the Secretary of the Interior's standards when it comes to creating a new building next to an old building. That's,
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
yeah, it's very difficult.
Okay.
And there's a lot of controversy about that. I'm of the school where I'm not as concerned if the building kind of looks like the old building, as long as some of the little details. There are some purists out there that really want to go the whole way, like this, for example, and make something that's totally different. You know, it's you know, architects, planners, you know, it's if you go to CPF conferences, you will, you know, get deep into that stuff. When you go to some of the seminars that talk about those kinds of things. But anyway, it's this building will undergo some refinement. I'm pretty sure that, you know, those glass boxes on the top, I'm not quite sure those really add to this design. And I'd like to see a little more of the elements, the vertical striations and the columns on the end pieces, but we'll see what happens. And I would guess that we're looking at November, December, when this might become before the hearing bodies in Napa. We'll see. So, any other questions? That was the first design. Too big, too bold.
I want to quickly mention to Ruth and others, we did, in conjunction with, you know, with the Clay Street Bridge project and trying to describe the historic district that was going to be heavily impacted, you know, if this bridge project went forward as planned. We actually did bring on a consultant who did look at that old inventory and did do some forms, you know, that basically updated a little bit that old inventory in the sense of creating some new forms of things that weren't on there, largely because when that was done, of course, you know, some things weren't 50 years old yet for one aspect, but also she's also an architectural historian. And so she had, you know, some other, you know, knowledge to be looking at some of the buildings. But anyway, we did do a lot of forms. And what's interesting, I think there's something like, you know, 37 maybe buildings that she said, you know, are significant, but then there's also quite a few. There's a category that have a lot of potential because they retain a lot of original features and they just have these facades kind of built on top of the, you know, as a skin on the old structure. And so we actually have quite a few buildings as well that have very good integrity underneath the outer facades. But anyway, at some point we can, you know, revisit, you know, kind of where she left off. And Ruth, if that's an interest, there's definitely plenty to do to follow up on that. And I can, you know, get with you.
Sure, sign me up.
Well,
And
go ahead. I got something to say about that, but go ahead, Ruth. It sounds like you want.
Oh, it's just that when Bill, you were talking about people putting heart stickers on in front of the post office. I mean, it would just be such a dream if people here truly came forward and showed their love of the old buildings in that way. And again, it wasn't just one person who's being ostracized by the city council or the planning commission for being some kind of obstructionist. That's what they call. They come out and call us obstructionists. And it's just rude. It's really rude. And to have that, what is it when you have enough people that you really have that, I get like that momentum, that mass. What is it when you need that critical mass?
Critical mass. Well,
yeah, it would be wonderful to have that critical mass and all those people showing up, and maybe in a backhanded way, although I don't totally agree with this whole cancel culture thing going on right now, because I think in ways there's some misguided aspects to it. But maybe a side effect of that will come a higher level of awareness about some of our wonderful buildings, and people will get more on board, which
Well,
would be great.
you've got to get the impetus to convince the council and this, and the people that work in the city of Placerville that preservation is all that Placerville is about. I mean, history. If that's gone, you really don't have a lot else going on. I mean, Napa, we've got wineries and tasting rooms and all that stuff. But why do people go to Placerville? They go there because they want to see the old Hangtown. They want to see the old Western Main Street, which is charming. And you can't whittle that away. You've got to make it better. You've got to preserve it. And I certainly, Jennifer did one of the consultants here in Napa looked at the work Jennifer did on that bridge, and she told me that, boy, that's almost like professional work, what Jennifer did. The kind of stuff that has to happen with the resources. You've really got to document them, and you've got to make the case. She made a case for the significance of that bridge, which is, professional grade stuff, basically. And that's what's got to happen. And the people in Placerville need to be convinced that the significance is important, and the significance is really what makes that town be the desirable place that people want to go.
Hey, Bill, it's Lisa. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Lisa.
Oh,
Can you hear-
yay, hi.
I had a question.
Oh, Kirk has a question too. Okay,
Okay, like,
Kirk.
Bill,
and then-
getting back to earlier when you were talking about your courthouse,
Oh, the
anyway.
courthouse.
what was its use before? How recently was it used as a courthouse? Is it being used as a courthouse now? And what role did the State Judicial Council have?
This was one of the early buildings that was used as a courthouse. And then it became, what they called the Hall of Records, because there was another older courthouse, as you saw on the other side. This building here, the court's in there as well. And there's a modern courthouse across the street that's not in these pictures, that is actually quite nicely designed for a modern building. Now this courthouse building here, this second floor, is what they use for the jury waiting rooms. And these are just offices down below here. And there are courtrooms behind the front facade of this building. There's 2 courtrooms, smaller courtrooms. But yes, it's being used as a courthouse. Is that where you, yeah. Is that what your question was on that?
Yes, and just to let us know, what role did the Judicial Council have? Because ours set up a committee that was supposedly being local representatives, and the general public didn't know about it, let alone know when they ever met. So how was it handled by that body in Napa?
Well, the judicial body, the judges, asked the county board of supervisors for a new building because they said that their facilities were inadequate. So the county board of supervisors, of course, has to hold public hearings, and they decided after doing their research that it was cheaper to take it down and build a new one. And that's when Napa County Landmarks and John Whitridge and the whole folks in Napa got involved and hired a preservation attorney to say, look, you can save this building and give the judges what they want by, using the California Historic Building Code, by, doing some, what do you call it? When they do they hired an architect that was familiar with preservation techniques and ways to save money to preserve old buildings. So the final result was that when they put all of the money together, the funds together, they found that fixing this building was just the same cost as building a new one, and would give them, more elegant courtrooms and plenty of space to do what they needed to do. And especially since they were building a new building across the street anyway for some of the other court functions. But the judges originally were the ones who wanted to take it down. But of course, since it's county and it has to go through the public process, the Board of Supervisors has to authorize anything that, funding for any kind of building. And that's part of the public meeting that the supervisors hold on their monthly meeting. And I'm sure that's probably the same in the county that the city of Placerville sits in. anyway, I think, was Ruth had a question?
No, actually, it was Lisa that was trying to.
It was Lisa, that's right, it's Lisa. There you
Right.
go. Lisa.
Yeah, hi. So when in April of this year, when the city bulldozed the tribe's sacred site on Upper Broadway, the tribe has been weekly asking for a hearing before the city council in order to be able to have a public discussion regarding that Upper Broadway site. And the city has just flat out ignored every last request to do that. The city has been saying through Cleve Morris that they're willing to have a private meeting with the tribe, and that in fact they do understand that the tribe is Aboriginal to El Dorado County, and they're not denying that they are actually the tribe of El Dorado County, but they will schedule this public meeting. It's been even asked in the city council meetings for this public meeting. So what do we do about a city council that even, you know, that won't respond to something like a request for a public meeting regarding, you know, these historical sites?
Well, it sounds to me like you might need to hire a preservation attorney, like, for example, Susan Brandt Hawley was instrumental in telling the city of Napa that they need to get with it as far as the CEQA analysis of the Opera House, especially. You know, when that was coming down, there was no two ways about it. The city wanted to take that down and build an office building, but you know, the attorney, you know, she convinced them that there's CEQA, you know, said a building is, you know, that in your site, I mean, it's eligible, even though it's not listed, that site is eligible to be listed because of its cultural resources. It doesn't have to be an architectural gem. That site has cultural significance to the county and to the tribe. And it, you know, outside of hiring an attorney, I don't know. I mean, I've never personally been that involved in that, but, you know, and having worked for government for 30 years, I've seen a lot of attorneys get involved for sure. But, you know, I've also worked for cities where we were sensitive to that because I was the preservation person. I mean, that's what I did there. So there wasn't the same kind of issues. If there was a preservation issue in the cities that I worked in, we'd take care of it because the city was sensitive to that, and so wasn't the council and the planning commission. Placerville is, it's hard for me to fathom that there's nobody there that cares about resources. I just have a hard time with that. I don't know. I mean, you might see if you can get a pro bono attorney to, you know, stand up and try to represent you guys. You know, somebody who's familiar with secret processes, and, you know, that cultural resource is eligible to be listed, even though it's not, because it has cultural significance.
Yeah, UC Davis wrote the tribe a letter saying that that site is eligible for as a historic resource.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine that it's not. You know, it totally is.
Right.
Yeah.
So the second thing is your local media, like for instance your newspapers or whatever other media in Napa?
We have a Napa County Register, Napa Valley Register newspaper. Yes.
Okay, and do they report on these things as they're brought up, or
Yes. Yes.
are they silent on it?
Oh, they do. And there's
So
some letters to the editor from citizens in this town, as you can well imagine, especially. And I got a box in my front room of newspaper clippings that I took from the Napa County Landmarks office when this whole thing was going down about the Hall of Records here. And I was amazed at the amount of letters to the editor that were in that newspaper. In, you know, early 90s, 1990, 91, 92. And, you know, I kind of remember seeing those because I was here then, but, you know, it's a long time ago. But yes, I mean, the newspaper, you know, they have a reporter that goes to every council meeting, at least they did before the shutdown. And I don't know how that's being handled now. I suppose they're on the Zoom. But yeah, I mean, the newspaper, you know, I mean, they certainly have their letters to the editor, and the letter to the editor and their editorials the editor writes their own opinion about things. And I happen to notice that the editor's opinion of this saving the Hall of Records back in 1991 was that it should be saved, because it's historical. So I think that the newspaper at that point anyway seemed to be on the side of preservation. I don't know how you have a Mountain Democrat. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the Mountain Democrat has been totally silent on the 4 historic preservation initiatives that were titled and summarized and given a tracking number by the city attorney, and that we're currently collecting signatures on.
Well, you guys might have to go to the Mountain Democrat and say, here's a news story, and write some letters to the editor, something.
Well, they've had, every week they get a press release about it.
Oh, they do?
Oh, yeah. And they were even in on the Zoom meeting a few weeks ago with Mike Drobish and Kirk and Mandy and myself regarding, the content of these initiatives. And they yet have not reported on it.
Well, I don't know about the politics of, as Ruth had mentioned before, that, the politics up there is a whole different thing than down in the Bay Area, and Napa, it's now kind of more Bay Area in its focus than it used to be.
Right.
50 years ago.
Right. And the city itself has not posted on the city clerk's webpage that these petitions are circulating.
See, that's, I just understand that stuff. It's like this.
I'd offer for Lisa's benefit, over a much larger period of time, the local paper has consistently been supportive of almost everything the city and county does. They've been supportive of tearing down the Hagman's Tree building, moving the Droids Monument, building a roundabout. So they're not inclined to take a position that's opposite of what the city and county want. So that's what they think their bread and butter rests with.
Yes, I just, I don't know. I have never lived in that kind of a community. My experience in life is living in a more liberal town in Massachusetts, and then living in San Francisco for 6 years, and living in Oakland for a while, and living in Fremont, and then living here. I mean, I've never really encountered that kind of, one way of looking at things where the city seemed to control everything. More into my feeling of my experience.
And I'd like to add about the Mountain Democrat, because I've been reading it for 35 years now, because I've lived here for 35 years. And I, like you, Bill, I always lived in progressive places, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then the Bay Area, and then here, came here 35. And it's an incredibly conservative paper, and they make no bones about it. And they're not at all even in their representation and what they choose to cover. And you just have to read their editorials. And it's just, I mean, many people I know won't even take the Mountain Democrat.
Really?
I do, oh yeah, won't even take it.
Well,
I mean, it's so one-sided. I take it because it's the only way to know what's going on, and so I'll just swallow the bitter pill and read it.
Yeah, well, I've heard a little of that. One of my friend's daughter and son-in-law, his daughter's husband, son-in-law was brought up somewhere in one of those little towns around Placerville. In fact, they're moving now because they both work as nurses over there, and they moved to Auburn in that hospital, and they just last week put a deposit on a house in Auburn, and they were telling me that they much prefer to live in the Auburn area than in the Placerville area for some reason. But and they talked about that newspaper being, pretty conservative. I haven't lived it. I don't know much about it, but they purchased a house that's midway between Grass Valley and Auburn. If I don't know if you've been up to the Sutter Hospital is up on that Highway 49, and anyway, that community seems much different than Placerville.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, but I had heard just what you're saying, Ruth. They had this conversation last week with those young folks, and they said the same thing about that. Anyway.
All right. Well, Bill, that was
really the question is. Oh, okay. Well, just one more thing.
Sure.
So really, with this group of people that we're talking to right now, really the question is, how do we shift the dialogue and how do we remotivate the surrounding county to, do what was happening in Napa
Well, I think
in support of those
I
buildings?
look back to some of the old, it's the citizens that really started, that got involved in Napa County landmarks. They ponied up their $30 a year fee and they got involved, and they wrote letters, they did volunteer stuff. They, helped out with surveys. I think you've got to get a group of people in the county and in the city interested. And that's where it started. I mean, Napa County Landmarks in the 70s was really a grassroots organization. It started because of what was happening with redevelopment, and it's just very, very difficult to get people motivated. I guess maybe there's a lot of folks up there that aren't that interested in saving things. I don't know what the citizenry really thinks. I mean, I think here in Napa there was a huge amount of people that said, hey, stop the bulldozers. We like these old buildings. We want to save the Migliavacca mansion. We want to save these buildings. And that's what happened.
Yeah, after watching what's been going on and running these initiatives, what it's kind of looking like to me is that a lot of those people are sitting in their easy chair, believing that there's enough warriors out there championing these issues.
Well,
And they're just kind of kicking back, thinking, oh yeah, they'll get it done. We don't have to worry about it too much. That's kind of what I've been seeing. Now, we have been getting a good response to sending direct emails to the City of Placerville residents, and they have been signing up on those forms, for giving us signatures for the initiatives.
good.
So they are responding. It's just, and they even showed up at, we brought the Aztecs to come dance at a farmer's market in support of these initiatives and the Broadway Sacred Site up there a few weeks ago. And the City of Placerville residents filled the parking lot. But the Mountain Democrat then went and turned around and said, oh, the Aztecs just showed up, but they didn't explain why the Aztecs showed up to dance.
Yeah. Well,
So,
they need some
it's
different
stuff like
leadership
that.
at that newspaper.
Yeah, so it's like, I guess we're kind of swimming around, these funny little currents of things that are happening here and there. Mountain Democrat will turn around and report everything that's happening with a protest for BLM in great detail. And yet, when we're trying to do these other things that are actually supportive of the city's character and content and assets, they don't say much. So I don't know, it's almost like start another newspaper. That's kind of what we did by starting this Placerville History Channel.
Well, yes. I mean, I think this is on the way to that. And I think that you've got more people involved that are not on this on a regular basis. You've got to, it's fine that some of those folks that have been involved that live out of town, but to get people, the townspeople really need to get engaged in this.
Huh. Okay, well.
It's got to be kind of like, hey, do you want to lose these buildings? Maybe put the fear of if nobody gets involved, we're losing this, and maybe that'll make people stand up and think about it. It's like, I think there's a lot more awareness. I remember when I was a real little kid in the '60s, there's some of those, when I lived in Massachusetts, they took down the train depot. They took a lot of this stuff down, and that was just part of what people did then. But I think there's more awareness now, or there should be more awareness that
Right.
heritage tourism, history is important.
Yeah, they did show in great numbers for the RFP when we were looking at, the visitor center concept versus the Arts Council's turning it into apartments. The city council room was filled a couple times for that. So the interest is there. It's okay. Well, maybe we just need to keep working it.
Keep working at it. I mean,
and maybe
I wish I knew more about what happened here in the '70s. I didn't move to Napa till 1989, so I don't really know a lot of that. And a lot of the people that were involved in that either don't live in Napa anymore or have passed on because they, you know, they're 90 something or whatever. They'd be very old now, those folks, or they have moved away from Napa. But
Well, I want to add one thing to what Lisa said. You know, we have very diverse people here in this county. And, you know, if we're going to unify on something like this, I think we have to be careful about not saying divisive things. Because, Lisa, I mean, we can't blame Black Lives Matter. You've done that many times. Look, many of us, I work with Sue Taylor quite a bit.
Ruth, I
on
just reported what the Mountain Democrat reports on and the content.
Mhm.
Okay, so before you start going on that one, and
I
No.
see your literature. What I'm trying to say, though, is a unifying message. Because I work with Sue Taylor, for instance, and we have very, very different backgrounds and we're politically opposite, but yet we don't bring up differences. There's really no point. And as we're going to work together, we have to be unified on what brings us together.
right, I mean, historic preservation is not a left or right wing issue as far as I can see. I mean, it's your community. It's wanting the best for your community, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. That's how I see it. But, you know, I think that some of these folks that sit on the council, I think their mode of operation is they think progress is new buildings, and that's got to be reoriented.
I guess.
But that's, you know, that
Ruth has said,
the Ketchup, the Druid Monument and the Ketchup and Mustard Building, the old City Hall, those are the things that seem to have the most kind of broad, you know, unifying potential.
Yes.
But there's so much going on, and you know, and I mean, these things are right in front of us as issues.
Right.
yeah,
And people need to be aware that that Ketchup and Mustard Building is a dear resource, and to lose that, I think a lot of people would wonder after it's gone, okay, what happened? Why didn't we get engaged? So maybe there needs to be a lot of public outcry on those kinds of things.
Ruth, I think to add to what you said, I guess I would point out that there's lots of media out there, and it shouldn't be a surprise what you're going to find with the local paper, but there's always the Sacramento Bee, and we have a lot of TV stations that are showing interest in Placerville. We had one crew up here yesterday. So there's lots of avenues to pursue.
Yeah.
Who was ever handling publicity on this one project, you might look at working with one or more other persons, but I wouldn't blame it just on one paper and a discovery that they're conservative or pro who's ever in office, because we know that and have known it for a long time.
Kirk, was that station or whoever you're talking about up here on a historic story?
Well, they nodded to me because I was interviewed by them before on an historic issue not that long ago. What they were up here for yesterday was COVID, but that's just an illustration that those local TV stations are trying to fill in the gap that the Bee is no longer able to provide on a regular basis. They no longer have a bureau here for at least the last 15 years. So I'm just saying there's
well,
lots
I welcome your help, Kirk. I welcome anybody's help who would like to write letters or call reporters and bring them in here regarding these 4 Preserve Historic Placerville initiatives. I'm out there doing the footwork, collecting signatures. So any help would be quite appreciated.
Here's another idea. The California Preservation Foundation has a newsletter that they distribute, and you know, they're a statewide preservation organization. In fact, the director of that, Cindy Heitzman, actually lives in Napa, but you know, they could be an asset to you guys because you know, they have a lot of resources, and they do have a newsletter, and they publish threatened treasures, you know, kinds of things where, you know, it's they're like Pasadena Heritage is a, you know, a smaller organization of a similar type that does that kind of thing. But, you know, California Preservation Foundation is responsible for the state of California and protecting the resources. So I know I would contact them and to see what they can do for you. I think Jennifer's familiar with those folks a little bit, so might be able to help you out there.
Yeah, I did try to reach out to them at various points. I mean, it had more to do with having them, be the sort of fiscal partner on some grant writing, and they ended up not wanting to do that. But
Right.
I mean,
that's
I
a
think
big
that
thing, yeah.
they've heard from us a lot. I do feel like they've heard from us a lot, and
Ah,
I don't know. I think that, I think a lot of the folks in historic preservation, and starting with the SHPO's office, I mean, I think that somewhat they know the importance of local government, and that when they sense that there's never going to be, well, when they sense that there's, I guess, let's just say, a lot of conflict around it, I guess, it seems.
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, anyway, the point is they have heard from us a lot. I do think that there's a couple of things that are really right around the corner. This bridge project, which does involve the Druid Monument, is right around the corner. The thing about ketchup and mustard is, I mean, everybody seems to agree. They're not going to take away the exterior. It's going to be a matter of, of what people consider, saving it or holding on to it. I don't think there's any question that those buildings will be there and that people will rally around having those buildings there. But
Right.
alterations are definitely, a threat that is going to divide people, because some people are just going to think, oh, it just has to look like it on the outside.
Well-
But this thing with the Druid Monument and the bridge and that whole piece of the historic district is a major thing. And the Druid Monument is the thing that people will get most motivated about. But, and that's just right around the corner. It is going to come. I'm sure they're waiting till after the election, because it's just such a hot topic, to kind of take that to the next step. But it is
sounds-
coming.
Yeah. Well, the Secretary of the Interior Standards will protect the exterior of the mustard and ketchup building, and the interior and the uses really are, that's a whole separate topic that preservation really cover. Adaptive reuse is a big part of preservation, and there are many buildings that weren't built for what they were that are something different inside now. Like this post office here in Napa, and that post office in San Francisco, and a whole bunch of other buildings that the important part is to preserve the exterior in the way that it was built.
Right. And I guess it's just, again, it's context. It's just the way, people don't necessarily, think as broadly about it. And I appreciate, Bill, that you're bringing up that, that you're going to have to have some of this adaptive reuse, like you're talking about, because it's going to be essential to strategies of keeping these things going, like the way the Presidio works or whatnot. I hadn't realized or heard that the Presidio altered a building like that building out behind, part of those buildings. I'm sort of interested in finding out more about that and surprised.
Yeah, I could show you pictures of that at the Disney Museum and a few other buildings where they altered the back. I've got many, because I've been in there many times and took pictures. And yes, I mean, but when you look at the front of the Presidio's building from the parade grounds, they still look the way they do years ago.
Right. I think this whole thing of a district, and it's funny because their whole concept of what is a district, I mean, I'm not even sure all of what their thought process was when they did that. I think it was just that there was little concentrations of maybe some older buildings from the 1850s, and they really kind of thought of the 1850s as, the historic period. They didn't kind of think of it, of the gold mining period, this broader period that we talk a lot about. But it is definitely a challenge, because there's just so much growth, knocking at the door and pushing. And I do think right now we are, though, at a moment where we have an opportunity. We have at least 2 city council candidates. Well, we have 3 of them because we have Mandy as well. But, they have, the current mayor is using preservation in his campaign. And he was on the commission, I guess the planning commission, when they voted, I guess, to whatever they did vote originally back in 2012 with the map. so, you know, the whole thing is to try, I think we do actually have a critical moment right now to have some dialogue, to force some dialogue, because they know there's political capital. And we know that a couple of them have already been speaking to it, specifically Jackie now and Mayor Saragosa, you know, and of course Mandy, because she's sponsoring one of the initiatives. But I think we really need to, you know, and I think Lisa, that's what Lisa was sort of on to too, is like we've got to kind of capture this election moment. I mean, these ballots are going out next Monday, I think, the 28th. They will be sending ballots in the mail, and so once the votes are cast, you know, it is Monday.
Yeah.
So I think we do need to get the dialogue going and put people on the spot to say, Mayor Saragosa, what do you mean by preservation in your campaign? When you say you stand for preservation, what does that mean?
Well,
So-
that's not much of a problem. I think Mike Saragosa has been, you know, fair and conducted his proceedings in a very well-balanced fashion. But it's Jackie No who's said that she respects the past, historic preservation, but has been the strongest advocate of them all against preservation, whether it's tearing down the Hangman's Tree buildings, building a roundabout, and you name it. So I think that's where the direction might go. I just wanted to lastly report, I don't know when this ends, but Bill, I thought I'd tell you that earlier I did some quick browsing on the subject of your rules. I could not find the Planning Commission rules for Napa County, but I did find that in Napa you have a education committee that requires testimony to be under oath. And I found a number of other planning commissions throughout the state where that's required.
Okay, yeah, I never really, I mean, I don't see people getting sworn in when but I suppose it's just part of the charter that people are under oath, I would guess.
It's a good practice because we've had instances where people have given advocates for particular positions have given false testimony and there's no sanctions.
Yeah. Well, one thing more I could say about the candidates, Napa County Landmarks has been very active in having these Zoom meetings. You know, we would have had them in person, but we had the three mayoral candidates on Monday. There was another one, the League of Women Voters had a session last night and tonight. And tomorrow at 1 p.m., Napa County Landmarks, on the board members are interviewing one of the council members for one of the districts. So, you know, we're active in interviewing these candidates. And I think that's something that had you an organized nonprofit, you could really be doing that, you know, because we're doing it under the guise of Napa County Landmarks. And our president has set up the Zoom account and he's organized these things. Anyway, just my last statement here. I know it's getting late.
All right. Well, thank you again, Bill. That was really fantastic. And we have recorded this. I think some of this chatter I will probably cut off. But it will be available to folks that weren't here tonight. And we really appreciate your involvement in, you know, this local, you know, this local effort that we have going on. And just for the good of the group, you know, we do have two more great speakers from outside of our immediate kind of El Dorado County area in the next 2 weeks. We have Tina Alexander, a historian. She calls herself an independent historian, but she has done, you know, quite a bit on the Black history, you know, of California and so forth next week. And it is pretty interesting because she has done a lot of work on that gold rush period and what was going on, you know, right after statehood with the Black community trying to, you know, kind of form their own school systems and things like that and the connection with the church. And then the following week, we actually going to have someone from Missouri, from St. Joseph, Missouri, who actually was the former director of the National Pony Express Museum there. He was a guest curator. And thanks to Frank Torres, I don't think he's still on the line, but he actually invited her in to be our speaker on the Hall of Riders exhibit there that she created, which will be quite a revelation, I think, that it gives an idea of where all these riders were from. But anyway, you all, thank you.
Thank you.
We've gone. You have all this great conversation came out of your talk, Bill. So we just really appreciate it, and we will all be back next Thursday.
Yes.
So thank you.
Unfortunately, I'll have to miss the 8th because that's my cultural heritage meeting in Napa. Is the second Thursday of the month, so I will miss that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It'll be waiting. It'll be waiting. But yes, thank you all
All right.
for all the great dialogue. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bill.
Bye-bye.
Bye.